Hey, this is going to be, I think, kind of a fun video filled with facts. So chunky you can eat it with a fork, but you want to use a spoon to get every drop. I'm going to talk about hiccups today. That's right, hiccups. Everybody gets them, right? We know what they are. Everybody's got their own cure for them. I don't know, drinking a glass of water upside down while, I don't know, reciting the national anthem or something like that. But hiccups are fascinating, and what I wanted to talk about, and this may be old news to some of you guys, but maybe it's new but it's amazing information. Amazing. Okay. Hiccuping. Now, for a long time, hiccuping was something of a mystery. Now, we've got so much modern technology where we can do all kinds of really neat things, like, trace nerve pathways, MRIs, all different kinds of ways. We can actually look at a stimulus and follow it back, and even follow it back to the brain. If you guys, maybe you've seen back in the olden days, a lot of what we know about neurocircuitry and how some of these things work was simply by, somebody gets shot in the head and suddenly, I don't know, they can't stomp their foot or something, whatever it is. So there's something that they can no longer do or they can't stop doing, and we say, oh, maybe that part of the brain, and narrowing it down that way. Now we have a lot more sophisticated ways of finding this information out. And so it's been known now that the hiccup is caused by stimulation. Well, it's not as simple as I'm going to make it out to be here. It's a little bit more complex than that. Don't comment that it's more complicated, because I know it is. But essentially, it is stimulation of a nerve called the vagus nerve. Now, the vagus nerves themselves are a fascinating. They're an amazing little evolutionary story themselves because of how they loop in tetrapods. It's really inexplicable without the concept of phylogeny evolution, meaning that if you look at a fish and you look at how they're arranged in a fish's gill system, and then you look at how they're arranged in a vertebrate system, you think the only way to get there from there is to envision that they were at one point in time part of an ancestral gill system. But that's an aside. I'll maybe do a video about that, because it's actually pretty neat stuff. But I'm going to talk about one of the functions of the vagus system, this vagus nerve. What it causes is it can cause in certain tetrapods, advanced tetrapods, what we call reptiles, mammals, and birds. It can cause the contraction of the diaphragm, but not just that. It starts muscles in the neck, muscles in the chest, abdominal cavity, contract in a spasm, Anyway, they jerk in such a way that causes you to gulp air. Your epiglottis closes suddenly, and that's what the cup is, the hiccup or whatever. I'm not sure entirely where the naming comes from. But essentially, it's a short intake of air, involuntary intake of air that repeats itself regularly. And we can do this through stimulation of the vagus nerve. You can also bring it on through things like spicy foods, carbonated beverages, eating too much, things like. There's lots of different ways that it can be brought on, all really coming back to this stimulation of the vagus nerve. Usually they go away fairly quickly. Sometimes they persist, and they have to, people will do these homemade cures for them, and that's kind of it's interesting stuff. But this is what is really this is the point of this video, is the fact that there's a study done. I'm going to show a paper right here. All right, this paper, what the authors of this paper did is they were looking at, because one of the ways that hiccups are treated is this. I think it's is it GABA B inhibitor? I think it's. I'd have to look that up real quick here. Anyway, it's one of the GABA inhibitor. It's a physiological pathway that by a drug that inhibits that pathway causes hiccups to cease. So it's actually like it's one of the important people that have hiccups that go on for if you probably heard about the guy who hiccuped for 57 years and that kind of stuff. That hiccups now we can stop them. Medical science has progressed to that point. Without having to stand on our head and recite the national anthem while eating dry sugar or whatever. But so what they were doing is they had noted that the vagus nerve that causes hiccups in people and in other mammals as well is very, very similar in behavior to the mechanism by which amphibians and lungfish, as well as a lot of the other bony fishes that gulp air, like garfish, some of the primitive bony fishes that come to the surface and gulp air, they do so by a hiccup. And so they were looking at it, and so they were tracing this pathway, found vagus nerve, exactly the same way it works in other advanced tetrapods. But to get this, they found that by giving the GABA inhibitor that stops hiccups in people, causes respiratory failure in these fish, in these amphibians. So think about that. What stops hiccups in advanced vertebrates can actually kill primitive vertebrates because they can no longer breathe. They're incapable of breathing. So this led to speculation that phylogenetically hiccuping is a holdover. It is the nervous pathways that allow us to hiccup are vestiges. They're in place. They do have function. They're not. Remember, vestigial doesn't mean non-functional. It just means they're not doing their primary function. And these nerves allow for us to breathe like the way that our ancestors 300 million years ago breathed, by gulping air in a sudden thing. Now we have a whole new complex of ways to breathe that's much more smooth. But that occasionally something will stimulate those nerves, we start to hiccup. And they also this is speculating that there's a sort of a feedback loop that starts once you hiccup and you continue on for a few minutes. That feedback loop gets reinforced, and they were speculating that what happens is that's kind of like I don't want to misrepresent what they're saying, but essentially, if this is wrong, I mean, if this is a bad analogy or a bad way to look at it, that's my fault, not their fault. But essentially, that it's waking up this ancient system, and your body's like, oh, I remember now how, this is how we breathe. And so that's why hiccups become harder to get rid of the longer you do them, because this loop gets set up, which is what, if you were an amphibian, you would just be constantly doing 24/7. You'd be gulping air or lungfish or whatever. And not really 24/7, but you know what I mean. Anyway, so I thought that was pretty damn neat. It's a great example of, there's simply no functional aspect of hiccups. They don't do anything for us. A hiccup is not gonna. There's no circumstances by which a hiccup has any positive function. It's just something that happens. It could be a complete coincidence that the exact same nervous pathway, the exact same parts of the brain that are stimulated, and the exact same drugs that inhibited it work in us and in the only breathing mechanism in amphibians and lungfish. But that would be an awfully huge coincidence, in my opinion. You see what I'm saying? The other thing, this is an aside. This came while I was kind of looking up some information on this. I found a great article right here. The authors in this article found that they were studying women who had suffered severe traumatic spinal cord injury, essentially severing of the spinal cord above the genitospinal portion, which resulted in no feeling below a certain point, including in the genital regions. And the women that they were studying had experienced what they said a sense of vaginocervical awareness, meaning even though they had no feeling, they knew where their parts were. In the same way you hold your hand out with your eyes closed, you know where your hand is. There's a sense. We have a sensory system that tells us where our body parts are at any given time, and that some of these women could experience orgasm despite not having feeling. And so the researchers did MRIs and were studying, tracing these neural pathways, and they found that the vagus nerve system, the same one responsible for hiccups, also transmitted these impulses to the brain and stimulated the parts of the brain that where the vagus nerves also originate from. And so basically the idea is that in some primitive system that these vagus nerves also formed the sensory system for the lower body in tetrapods that has now since been replaced. However, when that replacement, the new improved system, is damaged, in at least some cases, this old system can reactivate and still transmit some nerve impulses. So it's back to this vestigial still having some function. It's fascinating bit of work, and it's pretty neat stuff. I've kind of ran across this on an article, and I'm just going to end this real quick. I'm out of time. If you're tired of trying to choke down dry sugar and you want to get rid of your hiccups, you might want to try a Stinky Pinky. So take care.